So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you're at. Thanks a lot for joining my presentation about Ionic and the comparison with other hybrid mobile frameworks. I want to start off with a short introduction, a little bit more to add than from Mike. I have over 16 years of development experience in general, and I've been building software for various companies, from startups to multinational enterprises like WeWork. And about 6 years ago, I started developing primarily for the mobile. And my mobile experience, my mobile adventure started in 2010 with iPhone 3G, then iPhone 3GS, and iPad first generation. That was like only Objective-C. And then I had a bit of a pause and I focused on hybrid mobile development about 6 years ago. Since then, I worked with Objective-C, Swift, and Java, but mostly for Cordova plugin development, and with Ionic framework since version 1 in the beta, so still with AngularJS. And then I also touched some development with React Native as well as Flutter most recently. Now I'm using this experience to advise our clients on choosing the right technologies for their business goals, and I want to share a little bit on that through this presentation. Imagine that you are faced with developing an application that is supposed to work across several platforms and different mobile devices like mobile, tablet, web, which are the most popular, but you could also consider like wearable devices and desktop applications. You'll want to pick a technology that has the right balance between time to market and also between creating the best possible experience across the entire user journey. You'll also do not want to realize in a few months or a year that you've made a wrong decision, that you've invested a lot of time in a framework that doesn't work in the long term, and that you see issues. So I've listed out several important considerations that you should take into account when deciding on the best options. And some of them are very relevant from the technical perspective, like platform support. So what kind of platform features you can use with the specific framework? What native interoperability features do you have? What's also the developer experience of the platform that you're using? You know, how friendly it is for you, to test, to debug, to run it, to deploy it. All of these factors are super important, but from the technical perspective. And there are also other extremely important things from the business side. So as an owner of a company or startup or even an enterprise technical lead, you have to consider things like talent availability. So when you want to scale your team, it's going to be easy for you to hire. It's going to be, you're going to see abundance of talent in a specific technology and framework. And you also want to look at transferability of existing skills that you have within your team and transferability between the platforms. So if you want to transfer some developers into your other projects, or if you want to transfer web development skills into mobile development, this is something that can be really important for you considering picking the right framework. I have under 30 minutes, so in the following slides I will only go through some of the considerations that make Ionic a really great choice in comparison to other popular mobile technologies, and specifically here React Native and Flutter, which I think are also amongst the most popular. I want to start by explaining a real-world example applications that we're building for one of our clients, which makes it also a pretty good case for a cross-platform app. It's a job board and a marketplace for nurses. So I'll start by showing you how the app looks and works a little bit later, and explain why it's a good candidate for a cross-platform experience. So without going into the app itself, when you have a job board of whatever sort, you need really good SEO support. So when you want to look for jobs in Google or Bing, the results show up for you as well, and your page is indexed nicely, and you can and nurses can find the jobs there. Also, if you want to share a specific job to Twitter, Facebook, share it with your friends, you want to be able to copy the URL, send it over, and you want that to show up nicely in Facebook with all of the nice meta tags that support title, image, description. So This makes, from the web development perspective, these are some of the important things if you have public-facing websites with some content that needs to be searched. Then also when a nurse wants to apply, you might want to have them include some recording of a video to attach with their application. Or you might want them to receive push notifications about jobs that match their profile. You might also want to notify them about the changes to the status of their application, or if the shift is coming up for their job. And that makes a great case for true native mobile capabilities, because, for instance, push notifications are not well supported on Safari. You definitely have to have some sort of a native interoperability for your application to be able to handle that. And finally, it's also a great choice because we would want to manage all of that from a single code base and be able to deliver features really fast across all of the platforms. And we don't want to go into the additional overhead of maintaining a separate Android applications developed with Java or Kotlin, or a separate Swift iOS app. We would really love to have this all in one place, all shared across all of the platforms and devices to have a consistent developer experience as well as user experience. This example application, this example job board and marketplace, and developed 3 simple apps based on 2 views from this application using 3 separate technologies. First is Ionic Vue, second is React Native, third is Flutter. This helped us better understand the differences between these platforms, and this is something that I'm going to share with you in a second. Okay, but before I do the demo of those applications, I want to show you a couple of slides that show the capabilities of each framework across platform support, but also web support. And on this slide, you will see how it compares for web, mobile, desktop, and wearables. And Ionic has the best support for the web of all those platforms because it obviously is based fully on web standards. And even though Flutter supports web natively, it actually has a little bit of a different rendering method than a traditional web markup. It actually comes with 2 rendering engines, the HTML rendering engine that uses HTML elements with some CSS and some Canvas elements and SVG, and the Canvas kit, which has very consistent experience across platforms, but also adds a lot to the download site and actually renders everything on the canvas, as the name suggests. Wearables, unfortunately, are any of these platforms. Flutter is the closest here, but still it only features right now Wear OS for the Android. So considering platform support, I would award 2 stars for each of the frameworks, because still, if you want to do wearables, for instance, or desktop on Ionic, React Native, you really have to do it natively in many cases. You have to code that in Swift, Java, and you're going to have to add that to your native projects to support. And for the type of application that we want to build, the web is quite an important platform, as I already mentioned. So I dedicated a separate slide to web support of the platforms that we tested. And these are supposed to be mobile-first platform after all, so I wanted to focus on some web caveats when considering them for the web as well, so that you have this single code base and reusable code everywhere. You'll notice that for Ionic Web, for Ionic, the web is actually an equal citizen to the mobile platform. It's 100% based on web technologies, as I already mentioned. You have full code reuse across platforms. You can basically have the same views on the mobile and the web. Use the responsive web design to size that and scale that nicely across different screen sizes. You can also rendering pretty easily, just like you would with Angular, React, and Vue. And this is something that I'll show you in the demos in a couple of minutes. The beautiful thing about Ionic is also that you can reuse a lot of existing web libraries, UI kits, and web components. Literally for one of the screens that I'm going to show, we just found a code pen to render markup for a calendar, and for other mobile frameworks, you would not be able to so easily integrate some of these features. And most of the web packages will work with your app out of the box. And it's also one very natural for web developers to work with Ionic, both on the mobile and on the web. With React Native, you will see that it's a little bit awkward for web developers. And when I'm going to compare the syntax of the markup, there's a limit in terms of what kind of web components from the web you can actually use for the mobile, and basically very little of those. And also what kind of React Native packages you can actually reuse on the web and run on the web. These are really real problems that we stumbled upon just delivering very basic views. In terms of Flutter, it has really the earliest support out of all of these platforms for the web. I would recommend it primarily for apps that you already have built for mobile, and mobile is your first citizen. You have the most users on the mobile. Just want to add web support. It's also good in a few other situations that I'll mention that go a little bit deeper on the tech side. Okay, so for the comparison, I'm actually going to do a little bit of a demo. So I will share my different screen for you. Just give me one moment to do so. And you'll see my other screen in a moment. Okay, cool. So I hope that you're already seeing that, because I had to switch from my conference app. And here I have 3 tabs. One with an app developed using Ionic View, and basically also the original application and NERSA website that you can see with the jobs, with the filters. You can obviously see that it's a traditional website. It's a traditional website with some jobs that you can take a look at. You can see what kind of data you have here. We wanted to reproduce that with mobile applications with those 3 platforms. And first, I'll start with Ionic. So Ionic already provided us with a lot of different UI components, and it will show in the difference of how long it took us to develop actually an Ionic versus React Native and Flutter. Here you can see that we are using the Ionic grid. It renders really nicely across different platforms. When you go into the details of a specific job, you can see also the details. You know, the calendar that I already mentioned was a really simple HTML and CSS code pen that we found. And with Ionic, we were able to implement the most features also across both these mobile and web screen sizes. Compared to all the other frameworks. So for React Native, you're going to see that experience is quite similar. Also, the markup that's generated, you have pretty good control over that, what kind of tags you're rendering, which is pretty nice. But you're going to see some of the challenges in the code that make it harder. Like, first of all, you don't have features, for instance, that you could use in native applications in React Native in mobile apps. You could use, for instance, a React Native grid, or you could use native base for your components, but you cannot actually use that for the web. The problem is that they won't compile for the web. Also, like we actually spent 30% more time delivering the experience with React Native, and similarly about 30% more time to deliver the Flutter experience compared to Ionic View. And in React Native, we weren't even able to the same feature to make it look nicely for the job details, as you can see here. You know, it doesn't scale that well. We would need to spend additional time to make it look nicely. And like, why is that? First of all, I already mentioned that Ionic comes with a great package of UI components. Second of all, you can use a lot of the packages from the web that already exist, and they will work very consistently across all of the different devices. And with React Native, you actually have pretty, you just have like the flexbox and relative positioning available here. So you need to spend more time. You cannot use existing packages for like grids, for instance, with native base and React Native responsive grid. We had challenges. They didn't compile for the web, so it was pretty tricky to implement. What is really great about Ionic is that I will compare now the code versions with here. So you can take a look at our job list item in Vue, and you'll notice that we have used the Ionic components. You'll notice, obviously, the standard HTML elements like divs, paragraphs, headings, and a lot of things that look really nicely out of the box, and you don't have to create a lot of custom code to make it look nicely. But if you want to make them look nicely, obviously can use a lot of the CSS features that that are readily available to you. Plus, you can use things like pseudo selectors in CSS, which is something that you cannot use at all in React Native. And if you compare that to the jobs list item in React Native, you'll notice that we have completely different elements that are not so familiar, like UI card, touchable opacity, image view, text, where you can define the specific HTML tags that are going to be used. And you'll only have the availability, as you can see here, to use Flexbox for styling that. If you're coming from the web development background, I'd bet that it's going to be much easier for you to get right into Ionic development versus React Native development, and that makes a huge difference. So that's what made up the 30% of time for us. And with a bigger application, you can only imagine how far further more it's going to require. To compare the same widget, that's the way it's called in Flutter, with Ionic and React Native. So we have a job card widget, and first of all, with Flutter, you're going to have to learn Dart, which obviously isn't the most popular of languages. JavaScript and TypeScript are right now quite ubiquitously used across the web, but not only on the front end, also. So you'll have plenty of people with that skill. For Flutter, you're specifically going to have to learn Dart. Fortunately, Flutter uses a widget tree structure that is very much inspired by React Native and React. So that approach may seem familiar to you if you develop with either of those, but at the same time, you're going to have to get used to completely different way of styling and laying out the widgets. This is going to be have to be completely new to you. So obviously, if you're new to all of those frameworks on both web and mobile, that's not going to make a difference. But if you have a web team in your company, going into Flutter development will probably take you the most time, and will have the steepest learning curve for you, definitely. You can see that adding colors, border radius, box shadow is done completely different than with CSS, right? You have specific props, you have basically classes to create box shadows, create those things, and these are basically Dart classes. You'll also look at development a lot differently. You'll have a lot of common features like dependency injection containers, a lot of the things that come from object-oriented programming by default. But at the same time, unlike with Angular, for example, you're going to have to make a lot of the decisions yourself. What dependency injection container to use, what networking library you're going to use. If you have ever worked with Ionic Vue, you'll know that these choices have already been made for you, and you have them out of the box. With Vue and with React, you get more flexibility, but at the same time, more decisions to make, definitely. I will share the code to those repositories, but I want to switch back to my presentation right now to go further with my style. Sorry for this inception for a second. And let's come back to my slides. So I wanted to come back to describe the Ionic developer experience in a little bit more depth and how it compares to others specifically. So obviously for web developers, as I already mentioned, the learning curve will be really low, like 90% of the skills that you already possess, plus the 10% for interacting with the native capacitor and Cordova integrations, depending on which one you're actually using. for creating the native bridge, and you're gonna be pretty productive with Ionic out of the box. It's also much less learn for web developers than React Native or Flutter. And the beautiful thing is that if you have never worked with development at all, like Ionic and Ionic is your first choice, then the skills you'll learn with Ionic will be transferable to traditional web development, and you can build also web applications with little effort, with little additional effort. Ionic has all of the components that are fully cross-platform, unlike the other platforms, which is something that I already presented, and they will look both nicely on the web and in the browser. So you won't necessarily have to write separate views. And the thing that was introduced not so long ago, it's support for also React and Vue on top of Angular support that was there from the start. And I think it's great because if you are familiar with any of those frameworks, you will be very comfortable going to Ionic and treating Ionic as just another component library that you might have experienced with the past, like material design or like Angular material, for instance, or something that you might have used for React, like Ant design. It's just kind of another UI framework. So just learn the components, how to use them, and the documentation is amazing. So for many teams, I would normally recommend going with Angular. It is much more opinionated than other frameworks, and it's pretty well documented and leaves little room for errors, bad practices. But if you're a fan of flexibility and enjoy the choice, you should definitely consider React or Vue. These are all great options with Ionic. The other big thing is that Ionic comes with a bunch of recommended Ionic native integrations, which is pretty cool. So they are curated. They live inside of the Ionic documentation, so you can have things for recording the screen. You can have things for push notifications. You have like keyword support from the web. All of that is nicely presented in the Ionic documentation. A lot of Cordova plugins and capacitor plugins are there already. So it will help you interact with the native platform features. You can expect similar things from the Expo Native SDK if you're working with React Native, but that's only to some extent, because in many cases you're going to have to reach for some add-ons that aren't included. And same goes for Flutter. So there's going to be packages that support a lot of different native features, but when you look for some specific things like, I don't know, Stripe SDK, then you either going to have to write your own bridge, or you're going to have some Dart packages developed by various providers. So the space is very fragmented, and this great list of Ionic native integration is definitely a great experience from the developer's perspective. Okay, so a little bit on the conclusions here. Like, is Ionic the clear winner? I would have to say no, but it's definitely always about the right tool for the job and the right choice for your specific applications. And I still recommend going with Ionic for 70% of the cases of the apps that we build for our clients. So, based on the considerations I presented earlier, the Ionic wins in first, the talent availability, because you can literally hire any web developer within a short time. They will be very productive with Ionic, whether they come from React, Angular, or Vue.js backgrounds, or even they have not worked with modern front-end frameworks. They will still be able to write good markup, good styling, and learning Ionic is going to be pretty not that such a steep learning curve, right? The other thing was about code reuse 100% and web standards compatibility across all platforms and devices. And you have already seen how this can cut your time to market by at least 30%, considering such a small app that only has 2 views. So imagine when you actually have to add more features and the app grows with time, you have a bigger business domain, and that you have to maintain 2 different views for different platforms. You might also have different business logic maintained for different platforms. If you, for instance, go for the web and Flutter, that adds up a lot of overhead for managing the teams, managing the work, and collaborating between the teams. Also, Ionic has great support for server-side rendering, which is probably something not a lot of people use, but I will show you a production applications where it worked really nicely for us, and it can help you create great SEO experience and social sharing friendly apps. And finally, from the documentation perspective, Ionic is really amazing itself, but also Angular, React, and Vue documentation is easily accessible and also very well presented. So to sum it up, I would only consider going with other hybrid mobile platforms for several reasons. If I need really performant, stunning UIs and deeper native interoperability, these are the two main reasons why I would consider ever choosing another hybrid mobile framework. So from the animations perspective, in React Native and Flutter, you can have a little bit superior support than the web support for animations. You can use tools like Lottie in React Native or Rive in Flutter, and it's going to really allow you creating beautiful performant animations with really good frame rates. Flutter also has very powerful support. And about Flutter itself, it has pretty great Swift, Java, and Kotlin integration, but also C++ interop. So if you ever wanted to build a cross-platform UI in Flutter and you would want to work it, we want to make it interoperable with a game engine, for instance, in Unity or Metal, you can do it with some effort, and with other platforms that would be very hard, or if possible at all. But still, Ionic will cover you in most of the scenarios. Those slides, like we shared before, they will be available to you, so you can take a look at all of those repositories that I made available. In Ionic View, you will also have the server-side rendering integrated, and I think it's a pretty good example, because server-side rendering in Vue 3, especially with TypeScript support, isn't well documented, so we had to put in a little effort to make it work. One thing that is still not working perfectly is the hydration of the on the front end of the server-side rendered code with the state and everything, which is not working perfectly. It would save you a little bit of load time. This is something that we'll probably add a little later. I want to just bring to the end of my presentation. So with a big thank you to Aji and Shams, who helped me prepare the demo applications so that I could compare the framers and the developer experience across those frameworks. Aji works on a daily basis with Ionic Angular, but he's also built Ionic React and React Native applications. He actually had to learn Vue specifically to deliver these applications, and even by learning it, we were still able to deliver it faster than the React Native, which is pretty impressive. Shams is a Flutter developer on our team since recently, and he contributed to the Flutter demo so that we can actually see how the developer experience looks like on the Flutter side as well. And I want to mention that at ITCraftship, we're always on the lookout for great hybrid mobile talent. So you want to check out our careers at here. And thank you for your attention. Let me know if you have any questions.